Good evening. My name is Don Shomette, and I'm delighted that everybody turned out here to listen to me babble on here about one of my favorite subjects, which is about Mallows Bay here in Charles County. First, I'd like to start off by thanking the Conservancy for supporting our nomination of Mallows Bay to become a National Marine Sanctuary. The nomination has gone in, and I'll tell you about it in a little bit. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Mallows Bay. And we have to start off 100 years ago. Because 100 years ago, we're on the anniversary coming up of America's entry into World War I, the war to end all wars. It didn't happen, but the United States entered World War I for a number of reasons. One of the most predominant reasons was Germany's declared program of unrestricted submarine warfare. And in March of 1917, I live in the 18th century, in March of 1917, German submarines sank 3 American ships. And just before that, the Germans had offered a deal with Mexico that if Mexico supported Germany, if America came into the war, that they would allow the Mexicans to reclaim Texas. And it was called the Zimmerman Telegram. And it was intercepted. And America had a reason to go to war. We had been supporting the Allies, but with the unrestricted submarine warfare, that was the last dig. Now, at this time, America didn't have much. A small army, mostly National Guardsmen, a fair-sized navy, but nothing to compete with the British or the Germans or the French, and no merchant marine. And when we entered the war, President Woodrow Wilson, who had signed the bill on April 6, said to the Allies, said to the Triple Entente, who had been fighting since 1914 and had already lost millions of men. And he said to them, what can we do? What can we do to help? Because it'll take us time to build an army and so forth. And David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, said, ships, ships, and more ships. Because 1 out of every 2 ships either entering or departing a British or French or Italian port was sunk by German submarines. At the beginning of the war, Great Britain had 51% of the world's shipping. They were the mightiest naval power and the biggest shippers, and which is why they owned half the world, one of the reasons. And we came into this program with a kind of a naivete. We come into wars totally unprepared. How many wars have we entered when we were not prepared? We're about to go into another one. And here we are, a nation which has been looking inward since the Civil War, when we were a fair power on the seas. And we've been looking westward, first to settle and then to conquer the West. And we had given up our maritime interests. And all of a sudden, we're called upon to save Europe. We've got to get supplies to our allies. And then we've got to get 2-3 million men there. How are we going to do this in a sea infested with submarines? So Wilson turns to a fellow named John Denman. John Denman, on the left here, had brought in California for the president's last election. He was an admiralty attorney, so he knew something about the water. And he was a supporter of the lumber interest in the Pacific West. And he was appointed to a newfound agency of the federal government, the United States Shipping Board, which had been created by the Secretary of Commerce, actually, a fellow named McAdoo, to help to build an American merchant marine anticipating our entry. And so he goes to Denman and he says, John, you got to do something. Bring me a plan. And Denman goes out and has a martini lunch or something like that at Gibson, I think it was, with a good friend of his from Harvard who never worked a day in his life, a guy named Eustace. And Eustace liked to sail. And he said, well, you know, all of our shipyards are tied up. The few shipyards we have, we only had 45,000 men in the entire nation building boats of any kind, steel ships or even workboats. So we weren't very well prepared. And those yards that we had were building, 70% of them were building warships for the Navy, and the other 30% were building merchant ships for Great Britain and France, which to help replace their losses. So he says, I got a plan, we can build wooden steamships. They don't cost anything. We got trillions of board feet of timber in the Pacific Northwest and in the South, and we can build them faster than the Germans can sink them. And Denman says, it's a great idea. He goes to the president. The president says, yeah, it's a great idea. Let's do it. Well, Denman brings in, they create an agency, sub-agency, a corporation called the Emergency Fleet Corporation, and the guy on the right is appointed to direct it. And he's something, because he built the Panama Canal. This guy's an engineer. He's cool. A guy named George Goethals. And Goethals and Denman immediately hate each other. Goethals is a kind of a proxy for the steel industry. And he says, you've got to build steel ships. Well, we can't build them quickly. It takes a year to build a steel ship. So they fight, and the president fires both of them. And the president brings in another guy, the guy on the far left. His name is Hurley, Edward Hurley, and he's an industrialist. And Hurley puts together a think tank of guys, and here you got, here you got Henry Ford, you got Edison, you've got Firestone, you've got some of the great men in industry and some of the great thinkers. And they said, okay, well, you got to split it down the middle. Well, Hurley goes forward and he hires this guy. His name is Charles Schwab. We all know Charles Schwab, right? He's that old guy you see on television. Well, Schwab he's a put-together guy. He knows how to do things. This guy is really a doer. And for $1 a year, he goes on. He could be making a lot more money. But he organizes the Emergency Fleet Corporation to build what they called a bridge to France. The idea was we're going to build 1,000 wooden ships in a year, 18 months. We're going to build 1,000 steel ships in 18 months. We're going to build a ship for every mile of the crossing. We're going to build them so that the Germans will lose by simple, they can't win by attrition. And Germany's in a bad shape now. So they set about to do this. And they're going to build them on the Pacific coast. They're going to build them on the Gulf coast. They're going to build them on the Atlantic coast. They're going to build them up in the Great Lakes. And these are going to save Europe from defeat, the Allies in Europe from defeat. And they set about on a program, a propaganda program, which is unheard of on the length and breadth of this program, with great stuff. Here's our American workman. Who becomes the hero of this story here? Because the American labor, which is just forming. Organized labor is forming under the AFL. Gompers is in charge of this, and okay, we've got to put together a lot of men to build these ships. We're going to have to put together millions of men who've never built ships. We've got to build the shipyards. We've got to build the landing ways. We've got the ramps to launch the ships. We've got to train the men to do this. We've got to house them. We've got to feed them. You can be exempt from the war, by the way. So there were quite a few volunteers. However, the pay was not particularly great. $3.85 for a 10-hour day, 6-day week is not what one would consider bountiful. And the labor movement gets involved here. And indeed, there are a number of strikes, not just in the shipyards, not just in the areas that are building boilers and so forth, the supplementary industries, but also in the timber industry. But I'll retrogress a bit here. We got to feed these guys, we got to house them. We got to get them to the jobs. Our merchant marine, the little ones that we had, 3 out of every 5 men on board a ship do not speak English. So we're going to be dealing with a huge immigrant population who are all going to get into this, so we got to teach them how to speak English. We got to teach them how to build, how to caulk a wooden ship. The carpenters have to get their apprentices and they got to teach them. There's got to be a training program, and we got to house them. This is the first social organized on a huge basis, social engineering in American history, because they are building towns and villages, such as this one up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, simply to house the workers close to the jobs. And if you're in the Louisiana Bayou, that's a problem. And there were a number of yards down there. They have to have health concerns. If you remember at the end of the war, those of you who were not here, well, nobody was here. But at the end of the war, there was a plague that hit the United States, which is called Spanish influenza. Millions of people died in the world from that influenza. And the problem was that we were still building ships at the end of the war. So they had every shipyard had to have its health service. They had their own recreation services. They had their own ball courts, and they actually had ball teams that competed with each other. So it was a big piece of social engineering. For the wooden ships, you've got to get, for each ship, between 1.75 million board feet to 2 million board feet to build a 275-foot vessel that ultimately is designed. And you got to move it. You've got a very poor railroad system in the United States. We're on different gauges. There's a number of different railways, so there's different gauges. So we have to organize. We have this massive program. If you think creating Homeland Security from nothing in the time it was created was a monstrous undertaking, this puts that to shame. We had about 80 million people in the country, and ultimately, between the Army and the Navy and the men building the ships and the military industries, you're dealing with 1 out of every 10 citizens of the United States, men, women, and children, engaged in this process. We had to deal with sabotage. Germans were getting into the country, and they were sabotaging the timber mills. They were occasionally sabotaging the ship launches. We had to do this from scratch. We had to develop a technology because, if you'll remember, with only 45,000 men building boats in the past, most of them steel, we didn't know how to build wooden boats. We'd forgot that. Civil War guys, the old guys that are still hanging around, are brought in and said, well, tell us how to do this. And these guys become the core of a training program, which is actually started down here in Newport News. These shipyards pop up overnight. It said anybody can get a contract to build these ships if you got a bucket of paint and you're living near the water. And one of the reasons that was almost true, because at the beginning, to be paid, you are paid in 3 parts. From the moment the keel is laid, that's 1/3 of your pay. The next is once the hull is finished and ready to launch, and the third is upon certification by the government. Well, most of these companies start up laying a keel and getting paid. They're playing ahead of the game. That's their seed money. So that changes because there is some misuse of this. But hundreds of yards are popping up all over the country. There's a standard design, which is this one here. It's called the Ferris design. And this takes 1,750,000 board feet to build. And this would take about 6 months, 5 to 6 months. And it's a pretty ugly boat, pretty square, but it would carry what they call deadweight tonnage, is 3,500 deadweight tons. Now, deadweight tonnage is what it carries. These are coal-burning ships. We're on the brink of going into diesels. Europe is already into diesels, but they can't manufacture them fast enough. So we're on the brink of this, and so they're coal-burning ships. Half of the deadweight tonnage they carry has got to be coal to get them to Europe. So it's not that economical. Nevertheless, we go ahead. This is down on the James River. One of them built at one of the yards down there, and they're all over the place. We have them in Maryland. We have them on the Patuxent River, down to Quantico Marine Base, which had just opened up. 2 of them were built there. We had steel ships being built at Alexandria. They're being built all over, and there's new types of designs that are going into this, the construction technique, because of the building that has to go in. They have to make it simple for guys. These guys that are building these ships, they're coming blank into this, and somebody's teaching them how to do it. And as they're doing this, the technology is changing. They got pneumatic guns for driving steel trunnels into a hull. Unfortunately, in wood ships, you don't want a steel trunnel, you want wooden trunnels because they expand once they're in. Steel will make you have a leaker. We learned that along the way. And you can see some of the steel bracings here that are done to reinforce the hull. The rudder assemblies, you keep that rudder in mind because you'll see it later on. This is all new to us. This is all brand new to us, and we are going in, as we always do in war, or whatever we do with American can do, and damn it, I don't care what it costs. Well, they cared afterwards. We do that too. This rudder post here was a 24-foot long rudder post, was formed by a machine, not by hand, which was a machine done just for rudder posts. The construction projects got underway very, very slowly because there was a lot of chaos. The winter of 1917 was so bad that the trains carrying timber from the northwest couldn't move. The Southern Pine Growers Association, who said, when queried by the government, can you provide the timber needed? And they said, oh, no problem. Yeah, we can build them. We're going to build them in Charleston. We're going to build them in Mobile. We're going to build them all over the East Coast and the South and the Gulf. But when push came to shove, they couldn't deliver because they had clear cut most of the South, and what was there was second growth. So when you build a ship that's 250, 300 feet long, you need a keel, one keel, 250 feet long. They didn't have it. So they had to ship it from the Pacific coast, from the Douglas fir forests. They were competing, of course, with timber for the Army. The Army wanted 50,000 airplanes, which required a different type of wood, which happens to be competitive. The trains had priority for shipping. They couldn't get a train to go from the Pacific coast to the East Coast without going through a priority list. And the military steel industry had the priority. So getting wood to the East Coast for the shipbuilders over here was a problem. And at one point they had 9,000 rail cars sitting there with timbers for the ships that are going to go to Alabama or going to South Carolina or North Carolina or Maryland. And they couldn't move for 3 months. Now, one of the innovative things that they did here was that when ships were being built in the old days, they built the whole thing in the yards. Now they're doing what they call fabrication, where they have, in the steel industry, they have the steel parts produced individually. Doesn't matter, it's all a standardized part. And then they end up doing that for the wood industry, for the timber. But when you're dealing with timber sitting on a rail car for 3 months and it rains, you get warped timber. So in some yards, they would have to make 1,000 alterations for one ship. The first ship to go off the ways, not to be certified, but to go off the ways, is called the Coyote up in Passaic, New Jersey. And this young lady here, the daughter of a dead governor up there, a guy named Hughes, launches the ship. There was a sabotage attempt on the ship on the railways. It didn't happen. They caught it in time, but it kind of preceded what was going to happen. There was all types of patriotism here. Americans were giving right and left, but there's always the scallywags. So there was a lot of chicanery. Nevertheless, we moved forward. We had these problems all over the place, and we moved forward with these ships. And on one day, in 1918, this is President Wilson's wife launching one of the steel ships. We had a lot of vessels named by her. She had priority naming rights, and she liked these weird names, names of remote Indian tribes or remote little villages in the middle of nowhere. But on one day, on July 4, 1918, we launched 95 ships in one day. We are going for records here. We are competing with each other. Each yard is competing with another yard. The shipping board's got its own flags, its own music bands. It's like its own little empire. Not little, it's a big empire. The main office in Philadelphia takes 9 stories of one building. So this is a big deal. This is a ship being launched out of Alexandria, the Alexandria shipyard. And remember these rails going down here. Remember those. In Philadelphia on the Delaware, most of the center of the steel industry is on the Delaware, and this is the Hog Island yards where they had 50 ships on the ways at any given time. And the minute one is off the ways, they got another one on. Well, it sounds very efficient, but it wasn't. But there were incredible feats that happened. This vessel here, called the Aberdeen, built in Aberdeen, Washington, was built. It's a wooden, what they call a hoe type, was built in 17 days. From the moment they laid the keel, which took 10 seconds, to the moment she sailed and was certified within 4 hours after that. And she ends up here. The ships were our means of changing the history of the world. By building this fleet, we do become the greatest shipbuilding nation in the history of the whole world, all the way back to Adam. We don't hold it for long, but we're there. And we are going to be competing with the United Kingdom, which doesn't like us being here, but they need us. These 4 ships here are rather interesting. One of them is the Aberdeen. One of them is the one in the upper right. It's called the North Bend. She was the very first wooden steamship to be certified. The Utoka down here was one of the first merchant marine training ships. And the ship to the right, I forget which one she is, but she is one of the first ships in history to be camouflaged. The art of camouflaging warships, indeed the art of military camouflage, is born in New York City in a tub in a building where they had a pool and a German periscope and a team of artists and engineers coming up with the idea of how to fool the enemy on the seas so that they wouldn't shoot these ships. And they came up with a whole series of things. Some of them were quite amusing, like a ship with a ship painted on the side going the other way. They had one where they had a patrol boat. I'm serious. They had one with a patrol boat. It was a beautifully painted patrol boat on the side of a ship. So it looked to the submarine like, oh, that guy's got some torpedoes. I better get out of here. He's got depth charges. And this one here on the right is what they call a dazzle, because optically it actually worked on the seas. When you were bouncing there, the submarine only had 30 seconds to look and get us and then fire. So the dazzle screwed up the estimation of distance. Well, the war is over before the fleet is finished. In October 1918, Germans are falling apart. Well, this is at the same time that the new elections are coming up in 1920. The guy here is Warren G. Harding. And he uses, and his allies in the Republican Party, come down on the U.S. Shipping Board very hard. They said, you wasted American money. This cost too much. There was corruption. There was this. There was that. And indeed, there were errors. There was corruption in a couple of places. But it became a party issue, and it became an issue of name-calling in the election, and Warren G. Harding won. The President of the United States by this time is unable really to defend his party because he's had a stroke, and his wife Edith is really kind of the gatekeeper to the president. And Harding, of course, has a problem himself, which is called the Teapot Dome scandal, but there's corruption. They don't know what to do with these ships now, though. The war is over, and we thought, well, we're going to be a big nation with a lot of ships. We are a new power. The problem is the world was absolutely destitute. Nobody had anything to trade. They had no money. We had backed them up in the war. We had saved Europe economically with infusions, massive infusions of cash. So we've got all of these ships, both steel and wood, are sitting around. What are we going to do with them? One suggestion came up. Let's build a bridge across the Hudson River. Palisades Park has just opened up. Everybody wants to go over there, and they got to go over by a ferry boat. They didn't have the George Washington Bridge. So they're going to take 50 of these boats. It actually comes before Congress to build a bridge, a pontoon bridge across the Hudson River. And it comes within a hair's breadth of actually happening. What are they going to do? There are no buyers for these ships. We offer them up for auction. Nobody wants them. They're obsolete. Diesel has come in. These wooden ships don't carry as much as a 10,000 ton carrier, iron steel carrier. 15,000 is being built now. So they're not economical. So they offer the fleet up for sale time and time again, and nobody comes in. They start to sell everything that the shipping board had. They sell the buildings in the towns. They sell the railroads that were built to get to the lumber mills. They sell the linens. They sell everything. This is 500 ships of the steel fleet sitting off of Poughkeepsie, New York. Can't do anything with them. It costs too much to scrap them. Nobody got no takers. The wooden steamship fleet, which is less in number, is brought to the James River, and here they are lined up in rows of 7. What are we going to do with them down there? Nobody knows. Tourists come in. People, they're moonlight cruises to go up and look at the ghost fleet. But nobody knows what to do with them. These are in the James. And finally, about 1922, another auction. There's several auctions. They tried to give them away to foreign countries, to Norway. Norway said, we don't want those things. Norway's a big shipping country. They were a very important country, and they said, these are inferior. Well, the technology had changed overnight. So everything had changed. So a company formed by a group of California lawyers formed a salvage company, and the salvage company, it's called Western Marine and Salvage, and they buy the entire fleet for $750,000. We do that, don't we? So they bought the entire wooden steamship fleet, which cost between $300 million and $500 million, $500 million, which is a huge amount of money in those days. When a man makes $5 a day, on a good day, this is a big deal. And the people get really upset, which certainly helps the Republicans in their candidacy, and they do win. And the fleet is sold, and it is brought from the James River, dragged up by one of the steamships, and dragged up in numbers, all the way up to the Potomac. And in the Potomac, they are brought to a place called Widewater, Virginia, where they are anchored, and 2 by 2 by 2 are brought up to a shipyard in Alexandria. This was the Virginia Shipbuilding Corporation, which had been built in 40 days. They had the first ship on the line within 40 days. And here you can see off to the left here, 6 of the ships. One of the first ships that was brought in there caught fire. Somebody flipped a cigarette butt into a room with some turpentine or oils or something, and it caught fire, and the whole waterfront here burned up. So that kind of put the kibosh on it for a while. And then I told you to look at those railways. If you know where the Wilson Bridge is, you go into the bridge, you can see these. That's what's left of those railways from that shipyard. Those are the first steel reinforced marine railways in the history. It was a great engineering innovation for shipyards. The rest of the yard was there, but they destroyed it for the bridge, which is named after Wilson. I said, well, let's look at the archaeology there first, and didn't go anywhere. So the fleet is anchored down, well, at least up to 218 ships. We don't know the exact number because the records are kind of misty on that. But we know that 218 ships from the 236 that were down in the James were supposed to come up here. And so they're anchored off of wide water, and one day they left the company, that salvage company, had got the big metal out of them, which incidentally is being sold to a country in the Far East that's building aircraft carriers with the metal. And so the ships are anchored there, and the two guys left to guard them, two guys for the whole bunch, are drinking one evening and knock over a lantern, and 10 ships go up. And the Marine Corps base turns out to fight it. They fight the fire and they put it out. They do a heroic job. But there's 10 ships down that go down there. So the fishermen in the area say, get out of here. And they move the whole fleet. They secure a place across the river called Mallows Bay in Charles County. There was one time called Mallows Bay, but the government got it wrong in its reports, and thereafter it became Mallows. The late Fred Tilp, who was a good friend of mine, said it was named after marshmallows, but I got it on better authority. Fred Tilp, who wrote a history of the Potomac River, great guy. This is an Army engineer's map made in 1929, which shows 152 ships within the confines of Mallows Bay. Now these boats are 250, 275, and 100 or 200 or 300 feet long, all confined in there. This is the biggest graveyard in the Western Hemisphere. Built in from 16 states. The vessels there we have identified by name. We know where they were built. We know pretty much their histories. And they were built by 56 shipyards in the nation. This makes this an enormous national resource representative of the shipbuilding across our nation at a very high point. And there they sit as far as you can see. The shipyards of the world were not producing what we produced here combined. The ships just sat there and began to degrade. The company was going belly up, and the Army engineers who had jurisdiction over the waters here said, well, you got to get rid of those hulls. They're becoming obstructions to navigation, because every now and then a storm would come up and one of them would float away. Indeed, a lot of them floated away. You got a couple of them down here, down at Maryland Point, opposite Maryland Point. You've got them even further down. You've got them up there at Sandy Point. You've got them elsewhere in the river, and there's some we don't know where they are. So the company puts together an effort to get rid of them, and they light up, I think, 36 vessels all at once. Here they are going up in smoke. It doesn't do the job. This is what it looked like afterwards for those vessels. But underneath of those vessels are the remains, 15 feet of hull. So it didn't quite do the job, and it caused more marine obstructions. But that's what we do. So after the company went belly up and sold itself to itself by creating another company, which got them out of the legal obligation of having to dispose of these ships, they opened it up. There was a lot of court cases regarding it. And scrap salvers during the Depression come down here to earn a few pennies. And a couple of bigger ones actually brought this four-masted ship down, which is to be a dormitory. It ultimately becomes a brothel. Actually, there are at least 5 or 10 floating brothels that are operating here. We know that from the record. That's not made up. The during the Prohibition, of course, this is also a place where illegal booze are produced, because these guys, the Treasury guys that came down, they could not figure out how to get through this maze of ships. And by the time they finally got in, the bootleggers are gone. The same thing with the ladies of the night. They would always get tipped off by somebody in the Charles County Police Department that there's going to be a raid. So they just pick up and they go over to the other shore. They work over there a while and then they come back. So that's the way it was up until the beginning of World War II. And you can see the area over here where the original area was. And when I was a young man, I saw the Ghost Fleet when I was just a child. And it was an amazing thing because you could see a good deal of the hulls. But where the old anchorage was, it says possible wrecks in this area. They're not possible because I tore the bottom out of my first boat. It's down there too. Mallows Bay becomes a target for usage by the federal government at the beginning of World War II. We are very, very in need of metal, of anything that we can salvage that can be used for the military effort. They make a deal. The government, the Strategic Metals Reserve Board, makes a deal with the Bethlehem Steel. And they said, well, we figure there's a couple of tens of thousands of tons of metal still in those ships, in the fittings and so forth. And if you salvage that, we will buy it from you at the price, and then we will sell it to you less than price. And if you lose money, we'll reimburse you. It was a sweetheart deal. And guess what? They lost money. But they do go down here with an industrial strength and great engineers. And if you'll notice over here, right up here, this basin is dug out by Bethlehem. And in this cove here, Liverpool Cove, they created little islands from the spoil. And those spoil islands were anchored by earlier vessels. Not the World War I vessels, but 19th century vessels. And one 18th century vessel. 1986, I came down to take pictures, and I ended up doing about a 10-year archaeological survey of Mallows Bay with a handful of money that I think I could have probably bought 2 meals at McDonald's with, which was grant money from the Maryland Historical Trust. And we surveyed with a basically volunteer group the entirety of Mallows Bay to an inventory of what was there. 1929, this is what was there. 1936, things have moved around a little bit. Natural motion by the currents and so forth. Some of the ships drifted away, like this is I forget what the date is, but there's a ship up here at Chapawamsa Creek, drifted right over. It wasn't until 1951, after the Army Corps of Engineers and the Marine Corps fought 10 years worth of battles, the Army Corps of Engineers finally dragged it back to Mallows Bay, well actually Sandy Point. And over on the other side at Widewater, there's the remains. You can see them from the air. You can see them from the water when you go on a boat. At low tide are the ships that sank over there. And one of them is the Aberdeen, the ship built in 17 days. 1943, this is what it looked like in Mallows Bay. And that's an aerial showing it. And you can see in the burning basin, if you look close, you can see several ships in there. 1951, Bethlehem Steel did a fairly good job before they pulled out, losing money. And you can see some of the islands down here that were created by from the spoil. 1952, this is what was there. And we had additionally, we had a bunch of barges that were used in the process. During the Western Marine operations, they tried a lot of ways to get rid of these hulls, and at the north end of Mallows, up a ways at Sandy Point, which had been a Civil War site, as all of this shore was, 20,000 Union troops operating here, and you can find them along these shores, remnants of them, was a marine railways, 4 large marine railways, and several ships are up there. And the idea was to burn the ships down on the railways and then haul the remains over and bury them in the land. And we found a buried ship, 275 feet long. You can see the ghost of these in a 1960s high-res. I made a high-res of it. You can see the marine railways there. And over here in the woods is some of the buried ships. In the burning basin, here you can see 4 of the ships as well as a couple of barges. And if you'll notice, there is a canal around it. Bethlehem builds this big basin and gates on this side over here. Right in here was a gate. And they had berms up here and a gate going across so that Mallows Creek, which fed through here, is diverted. They built a canal to relieve the pressure. They would float ships in, close the gates, pump the water out, and burn the ships down dry. Clever idea. The spoil went into Liverpool Cove, and those spoil area is anchored by 19th century boats, sloops, schooners, you name it, workboats mostly. Mallows Bay starts to assert, because of the presence of so many boats, they literally cut off the Potomac River. At one time when I first went there, you could walk from one end of the bay to the other without getting wet. That's it today. And there are other vessels that have joined there, such as the one at the bottom, which is called the Accomac, the last Kip-to-Peak ferry, built in 1918, by the way. But what has happened is that they are asserting a presence on the environment. Erosion has completely stopped on the shoreline because tidal action doesn't get in there. The ships themselves have become flower pots. They have their own mini environments on them, mini ecosystems, which have attracted an awful lot of wildlife that had been eviscerated from this area by pollution, by the ships being there in the first place, and now Mother Nature is taking this back. In the winter, or in the fall, which is a very beautiful time to be there, you know that. When the leaves are changing, winter and the fall and spring are just fantastic. But in the winter, it becomes also rather unique because you get some things happening that most people don't recognize. Even Noah didn't recognize it. But we have all of these vessels here, which are just in great abundance. And this is when the ice is forming in the winter. In a lake with confined shoreline, when you have the lake freezes over, say Lake Champlain, and it always will break up. But it always breaks up along the same lines. You get a crack in the ice, it's going to go pretty much in the same direction as it did the year before and the year before that. And what we have here in Mallows Bay is the ice forming pretty much in the same place as it did the year before in the same shapes and breaking up the same way. Inside of Mallows Bay, it's warmer year-round than it is 50 feet further out into the Potomac River. So it's a rather unique environment, and we don't know why this is happening. I mean, there's not a lot of study that's been done on anything like this. These islands, even the ones that are going underwater, some of them are underwater, fully underwater now. This is the North Bend, the first one that came off of to be certified. It's a unique place, and there is a lot of history here that is still walking around. We were just talking about oral history of people who've seen it in later years. But this gentleman here, I interviewed him. He was from St. Mary's County. Well, he was living in St. Mary's. He was one of the foremen building these two ships, which were built at Quantico, Virginia, which are part of the wooden fleet. But we have people who have seen these ships or helped strip them at various times, or been part of the people making their livelihoods down there, living off it during the Depression. When we came in, we had no money to survey this, which was pretty formidable for 4 or 5 volunteers and myself. But over time we did it. And we noted the evolution of this area. This is called Grady Spit, right here at the north end. There's a ship under there. There's 1.5 ships under there. And that is growing much more rapidly now. The accretion of land within this area. In 150 years, we're going to have a wetland here with a bunch of ships under it, which is, to me, rather cool, if we don't have global warming flooding at all. The area is unique historically, it is unique environmentally, it is unique archaeologically, because we have ships not just from this period in time. We have an evolution of the shoreline, which is unique. We have an evolution of the environment, which is unique. The Army Corps of Engineers introduced hydrilla here to clean up the river, which is not a great thing, I don't think, but that's me, the guy without the hair. We didn't have much technology to throw at it because the most amount of money I had, well, the total amount was $8,000 to survey this fleet. And I got to say, the Maryland Historical Trust thought it was a waste at the time. But now they're behind us, so, I mean, they're supportive. We went down and got volunteer flyovers. This is before 9/11. This is an aerial infrared in which we discovered, well, you can't quite see it there, but there's a barge right there. We never knew it was there. A lot of this is just below the water, but it is absolutely stunning. If you go there when the tide is low, particularly in the spring and in the fall, these ships with trees 20, 30, 40 feet tall grown at them, whole islands. You don't know from the Potomac River what you're looking at. You don't know these are ships. There's 3 ships lined up. It's amazing. And on board are whole colonies of animals. Some of them are rookeries for birds that are now stopping over. And some of these animals that, and particularly the fish, which come in and spawn and leave, some of them don't go away now. We're having this unique thing that happens like outside of a nuclear power hot water vent, where they just sit there with their mouths open and eat all the stuff that is generated by the hot water. We found archaeologically that these ships do not conform to the plans. There's concrete frames in 1/3 of them. You can see part of the concrete in that one ship, one hulk. Others are exposed. This looks like soldiers to me in trenches, World War I soldiers. Some of them are just beautiful in their settings. And some of them can tell us a lot. This is the Sentinel wreck. We have no name for it, the one that floated over to Chompewampsic. She's held to the shoreline by cables, tied into trees which have grown out over the cables. This is one of the barges. It's a 75-foot long barge. But one of the unique things about it is it's very similar in design, almost a replica, of the types of barges that were used by General McClellan in the Civil War, launching his campaign against Virginia. And they were moving hundreds of thousands of barges out of there. And a lot of them were left and were surplused. And is this one of them? We don't know. But it's a very strong contender. There are architectural features. This is a washroom floor. This is on a site that was lifted up by Hurricane Isabel and literally just plopped down on another ship. There you can see some of the one of the concrete frames, and if you look the timber, you can see all the burn that was done to the timber in trying to reduce it. Some of them have a lot of concrete. This one has since kind of collapsed out, but why is so much concrete in here? And we went to all the experts, and we don't know. possibly as stiffener for the gun deck because they had a heavy gun on the bow. This is the bow of one of the ships. Possibly to maintain the trim, we don't know. Here's typical of a tree growing out of part of the ship. And one of the steel frames that, reinforcement rods that I showed you illustrations of. I set my wife and one of her colleagues, both of them are horticulturalists, and they said, okay, I'll leave you on this ship and I'll pick you up when you finish inventorying all the flora and fauna. And so what we were doing was developing a profile of how these ships are evolving. And now we're going to go back. And with the aid of students from Charles County, we're going to inventory this every year so we can trace the evolution of this. We've got beavers living on board. Where the beavers live, they don't stop cutting things down, but the hulls of the ships where the beavers live are better preserved because the root structures, trees don't grow on them, and the root structures don't get a chance to go down and tear open the hulls. Typical on board. All kinds of stuff are there. This ship is loaded with asbestos. It's the Accomac, and that's what she looked like when she came to the Chesapeake to become the Kip-to-Peak Ferry. That's what she looks like now, and you can see one of the ships that drifted away that was hauled back by the Coast Guard sitting right beside her. It's actually quite pretty. Very dangerous to be on because it's collapsing. I don't recommend anybody going on board now. I have been inside her and mapped her insides. And there is a pair of osprey that I've seen, I think 6 generations of osprey that have grown up here. It's really remarkable. One of the juveniles. At Liverpool Point, we had this fellow who starts up a little factory here after the Civil War. The Potomac River was one of the biggest sturgeon fishing areas in America. George Washington's time, they threw them away because they were so prolific. They just lined them up on the shores, and they let the slaves eat them. And they thought this stuff, which we now call caviar, was just slimy. It's just, no, throw it, get rid of it. And this fellow opened up a sturgeon fishing operation, brought in boats from Philadelphia, and built a caviar processing house here, which went out of business in 1922 when the ships were brought over here. This is a ship called the Mermentau, which was one of the last wooden Manhattan fishing ships built down at Reedville. And unfortunately, the Department of Natural Resources derelict removal program tore her apart. And there's where she is now. More of a marine hazard than that big hulk there, which is quite important, was. And to the right on the bottom, you can see the old Civil War wharf, where an attack on Virginia was launched by troops stationed at Liverpool Point. And when they went to Virginia and raided into Virginia under Dan Sickles, it was the first use of the Gatling gun in American history. 2 years before it has been said to be used. The cove here, we find all types of vessels in here where those little islands were. One of them is what we believe to be a Virginia State Navy vessel from the American Revolution, which was lost here in combat with a British expedition under Governor Dunmore on July 22nd, 1776. 2 of them are lost, and we think we have one of them right here. I mentioned the floating brothels. This one here, which was also taken apart by DNR, had 5 bunks and a brick fireplace and a bar and a lot of condom packages lying around from the 1920s, 30s. A bug eye remains, 5-log canoe, another one. Centerboard vessel, this is, if you've ever heard of crab scrapes, this is a turtle scrape. when the turtling industry in Maryland was very, very big, which was outlawed, of course, but this may be the only vessel like it. This is what we call a composite vessel, probably one of the World War I ships, but possibly the USS Nokomis, a U.S. Navy vessel, which we did survey. Composite steel and iron and wood. There's when there was a wildcatter, actually a squatter marina there, which the guy didn't own the property. He was just there and said it's his, which is now gone. And there it was back then. A number of these vessels we think are still there. We have done probing on the bottom, but no metal detecting. And the canal, what's remains of the canal that went around it. And we have the Chester, a Sea Scout boat that had one time been a U.S. Coast Guard patrol boat, which is now much worse off. And the only building that survives from World War II, they were going to take that down too, but we really made a noise about it. So this is what we have there, just in Mallows Bay, just in the whole area, and across the river. And we've got a couple of them downriver like that, and you can see their outlines. The one up there is probably the Aberdeen. Representing of American shipbuilding from 16 states, 7 of the 8 types of vessels that were built in World War I, including some like this one, which is lifted up by Hurricane Isabel and just dropped on top of the SS Coyote. There she is from the side. This is now a rookery. Although some tourists went out there, we think they were tourists that went out there and either accidentally or intentionally set it afire. It might have been a lightning strike, but the ship was partly burned this past year, wasn't it? Last year. And here you can see when it was part of becoming a rookery. Elements all around about the salvage operation. There's a tool up there that is trying to pull out this piece of metal and never got it out. And ashore, there is all kinds of stuff. Everything from Civil War period stuff, Native American sites. We got 2 sites John Smith visited on his voyage up the Potomac River. These things are, these cleats and tow lines are hooked to trees. And what they did was what they call a California yarding system, where they ran it down the slope to the water's edge. There's a donkey engine in the middle, and the donkey engine pulled it up just so far, and the anchorage for the donkey engine cables were in the trees, and those tree cables are still there. You've seen them. Those cables are still there. The trail where they hauled the stuff away during the scrap salvage period is lined on either side with metal that fell off the carts. And that's variations of the yarding system. We have places in Charles County and St. Mary's County where scrap salvers salvage the wood. This barn down at Colton Point is made entirely of hatch covers. Thank you. And they have numbers in them, and we hope someday we'll be able to connect the two. We have these treasures all around us. Mallows Bay just happens to be the biggest in the Western Hemisphere. But you can go to Baltimore. In Baltimore, we've got a bunch of these ships too. They're used as bulkheads. They're just abandoned out there. This is right under, near the Pennington Avenue Bridge. This is one of the ships, one of the World War I ships, and I took this picture just before hobos burned it down in a drunken rage. And the ship was totaled up in Curtis Creek. And I told you to look at that rudder on that plan. There it is. It's a match. That's gone too, unfortunately. In the James River, we had these boats. We had a number of them that were left. The metal boat here is gone now, and one of these boats here is gone. But further downriver, we still have 7 of them tied up. As you can see on the bottom, we have one called, I believe she's the Belmont, which was sunk off of Clarendon. And then we have one opposite Clarendon, which is right there. And we're hoping that they don't get removed. Mallows Bay is a unique place, which is why I pushed for a nomination of Mallows Bay to the Marine Sanctuary Program, which just opened up this year, which went through public review to initiate the program, which has been dead for 20 years. And this is a bottom-up program. And you folks, by signing your assistance and approval of this program, helped us get this nomination in. I have a copy of it if anybody wants to look at it. But we are nominating 17 square miles of the Potomac River, in which these ships and others, a total of 185 ships that we have identified archaeologically or historically, from the American Revolution all the way through the 1960s. This area is one of the most unique. It's the nation's river, as President Johnson called it. And here we have a chance to do something nobody else has done. And we have connected with groups like yours, the Charles County, Prince George's County, all the counties. We have got our federal and state legislators behind it. We have institutions behind it. And this is the area that we are looking at. One of the most environmentally diverse river systems on the eastern seaboard. This is unique. This will be the most unique sanctuary of its kind in the world. And one day I predict it will be a world-class site. So it's got everything, and it doesn't stop anybody from doing anything, from fishing, from hunting. The only thing you can't do is to carry a piece of these ships away with you. We want to have a program where you can visit, you can participate. It's an ongoing laboratory of science, of archaeology, and in environmental engineering. All of these things we want to engage the public in. This is a bottom-up operation, wasn't a top-down. I suggested it to NOAA. They already kind of had it in their craw that they were going to look at it anyway. But it kind of got the ball rolling. And last week, we submitted the nomination for this district, this 17 square mile area, to become a National Marine Sanctuary. And it has also been nominated to the National Register of Historic Places, both on the same day. And we have been told by everybody involved, every agency, every institution, and the federal government, it's been green lighted. It's going to have to go through a public review process. And it's got a few other hurdles to go, but it doesn't have to go before Congress, thank God. Mallows Bay has got the most diverse of everything you can imagine on the eastern seaboard of the United States, historically, environmentally, you name it, in the country actually. And we're joining 14 other national marine sanctuaries, one of which has just been expanded up in Lake Huron, called Thunder Bay. It is quadrupled in size with the approval of everybody in the state of Michigan and the federal government, which is wonderful. This is going to be a cooperative management program with a citizens committee being part of the management. So this is a good thing. Mallows Bay is happening. It's happening in Charles County. It's going to assist the tourist industry. It's going to help revitalize, I hope, as it did up on in Thunder Bay National Preserve. It's going to help restore some economic viability for the Nanjemoy Peninsula, and for Charles County, give some bonuses too. We're only 30 miles from the nation's capital, where they get 17 million visitors a year. If we can peel off from some of that, we can do a lot of good down here. Our schools are involved, our colleges are involved, and hopefully you will be involved too. So I thank you very much. I know I talked too long, but it's my favorite subject.